Daenerys is left alone when she begins to stare outside the window of her room within Illyriel's mansion. She hears the singing of red priests as they chant for their fire god R'hllor. She also hears ragged children playing games in the street of Pentos just outside of Illyriel's property. She can also see the children as they run around screaming and shouting as they play. Dany describes them as barefoot and breathless, and dressed in tatter with no past and no future, and no feast to attend at Khal Drogo's manse. We slowly start to understand why Daenerys is envious of the children and can understand why she just wants to go and play with the kids on the street of Pentos, since she is just 13 years old after all. The desire to play with kids her own age is a completely natural feeling, but the reason as to why she really wants to go out with them is because she really wants to just run away from all of her problems. Since she has to soon prepare to meet this man named Khal Drogo, and not only does she have to meet him, but she's also expected to essentially seduce Drogo. Now, I only say this because of what her older brother Viserys told her in my last video. And I quote, Drogo has 1,000 horses. Tonight he looks for a different sort of mount. Viserys then later warns Dany, telling her, you will not fail me tonight. If you do, it will go hard for you. You don't want to wake the dragon, do you? With all these expectations on Dany's mind, suddenly Daenerys begins to think about Westeros, the home she's never known. That's when Daenerys reveals to us that within the free city of Essos, they actually call Westeros the Sunset Kingdom. The reason for this is because of the location of the Westeros continent in relation to the Essos continent. In Dany's own words, and I quote, somewhere beyond the sunset across the narrow sea. Daenerys then states that the Dothraki also have their own name for Westeros. The Dothraki refer to Westeros as Rosh Andali, which translates to the land of the Andals. Daenerys then reveals that her brother Viserys actually has his own name for Westeros as well. Viserys, however, just refers to Westeros as, and I quote, our land, he called it. The words were like a prayer with him. Ours by blood right, taken from us by treachery, but ours still. Ours forever. You do not steal from the dragon. Oh no, the dragon remembers. That's when Daenerys informs us that she actually doesn't remember anything about Westeros. We know this since she was actually born on Dragonstone after Robert Baratheon took the Iron Throne from House Targaryen during the sack of King's Landing with the help of Tywin Lannister. If you'd like to know more information, I covered all of this and how things went down in another video I made called Daenerys Targaryen's Origin Story. Dany continues her thoughts on Westeros, informing us, and I quote, she had never seen this land her brother said was theirs, this realm beyond the narrow sea. These places he talked of, Casterly Rock, and the Eyrie, Highgarden, and the Vale of Arryn, Dorne, and the Isle of Faces, they were all just words to her. Viserys had been a boy of 8 when they had fled King's Landing to escape the advancing armies of the usurper, but Daenerys had only been a quickening in their mother's womb. So that's how Daenerys reveals to us that everything she knows about Westeros has just been stories told to her by her older brother Viserys, who was just a boy of 8 when he himself had last lived in Westeros. So that's just confirming or telling us that he's not exactly what you would call a reliable narrator. Part of the stories that he had told Dany includes their journey to Dragonstone from King's Landing after the death of their eldest brother, Rhaegar Targaryen, whose death was essentially the beginning of the end for both the war known as Robert's Rebellion as well as the regime of House Targaryen. Daenerys describes her eldest brother as, and I quote, her brother Rhaegar battling the usurper in the bloody waters of the Trident and dying for the woman he loved. Now, this is an interesting quote because, as we know, when it comes to conflict, there are always two sides to every story. And from the perspective of House Targaryen, Rhaegar was in love with Lyanna Stark, which is pretty cruel and wicked considering Rhaegar was already married to a woman named Elia Martell who had given him 2 healthy babies, a boy and a girl. Rhaegar, however, believed that he needed to have 3 children due to a popular phrase and prophecy amongst House Targaryen. That phrase is the dragon has 3 heads. It's said all throughout the books, and it's a reference to the banner of House Targaryen, And it's also a reference to the conqueror Aegon Targaryen and his sister wives, Visenya and Rhaenys. Now, Rhaegar's wife, Elia, was described as a sickly woman, and it's on good record that she experienced a lot of difficulties during her pregnancy, with maesters and doctors advising her that if she were to give birth again, it could kill her, causing Rhaegar to seek out another woman for a third child. Which is crazy. Just fucking. Anyways. However, history tells us that Rhaegar actually kidnapped and abducted Lyanna Stark and seemingly abused her by forcing himself onto her. We will learn more about this in the next chapter with Eddard Stark, better known as Ned Stark, who is one of Lyanna's older brothers. However, this is important to highlight as I believe it's the first time the book describes the nature of their relationship. Daenerys then goes on to inform us what she knows of the sack of King's Landing, which does include the murder of Princess Elia of Dorne and her two children with Rhaegar Targaryen. They were all murdered as a result of the sack of King's Landing, ordered by Tywin Lannister, as an effort to prove his loyalty to Robert Baratheon due to the fact that he did serve the Mad King Aerys Targaryen, and he wanted to prove to Robert that he was loyal to his new king, Robert Baratheon, out with the old, in with the new, and Robert, this put a smile on his face, essentially, and he was very pleased, and he rewarded Tywin Lannister for this murder of Ilya and the two Targaryen children. And I once again want to restate that I covered the sack of King's Landing in my video, Daenerys Targaryen's origin story. So once again, just want to let everyone know to check that out if you'd like to know the full context. Daenerys then continues to inform us how she was born on Dragonstone just 9 days after they arrived after leaving from King's Landing. She then describes the night that she was born, and I quote, "A raging summer storm threatened to rip the island fastness apart. They said that storm was terrible." Now, this is the reason why she's also named and called Stormborn. It's a bit of a nickname slash a middle name for Daenerys. Dany does then continue to describe that awful, horrendous night based on what she has been told. And I quote, "The Targaryen fleet was smashed while it laid at anchor. A huge stone blocks were ripped from the parapets and sent hurtling into the wild waters of the narrow sea. Her mother had died birthing her, and for that her brother Viserys had never forgiven her." Daenerys then informs us she does not remember Dragonstone as they did not stay there for much longer, stating that word had spread that the new king of Westeros had sent his brother Stannis Baratheon to retake Dragonstone and end the Targaryen name once and for all. Dany then claims that men who were loyal to House Targaryen actually plotted to sell Dany and Viserys to Robert, thinking of the money that could be made from selling a prince and a princess. They would have done so successfully if not for 5 men who remained loyal to House Targaryen, one of whom Dany remembers as Sir Willem Darry. And I quote, "She remembered Sir Willem dimly, a great bear of a man, half blind, roaring and bellowing orders from his sickbed. The servants had lived in terror of him, but he had always been kind to Dany. He called her little princess and sometimes my lady." Now, I want to highlight this because later on, Daenerys goes on to describe one other man as her great bear. That man we have not met yet, and his name is Jorah Mormont. Now, I don't want to get too into Jorah until we actually get to meet him. However, in the books, let's just say Jorah totally fucking sucks. He is a fucking creep, and for the most part is only loyal to Dany because he finds her extremely attractive. I could make a whole video on why I hate Jorah in the books, but for the sake of moving on, I won't. At least not yet. But I do, however, feel the need to point this out because, in my opinion, this is why Dany keeps Jorah around for as long as she does. Dany clearly has some form of father issues due to the fact that the only father figure she has known in her life was Sir Willem Darry. Plus, she has never met or known her actual father, Mad King Aerys, which ironically is probably a good thing. So it kind of makes sense as to why she puts up with Jorah's bullshit for as long as she does, because I'm pretty sure in many ways she compares the small bits of kindness and loyalty that Jorah shows her to Sir Willem Darry, which is just very sad because in Jorah's case, it's just another example of a man being nice to a girl just to get into her pants, not because he actually cares about her as an individual. Dany then informs us that Sir Willem became very sick shortly after arriving in Braavos and leaving Dragonstone. She describes him as bedridden, as Dany claims, and I quote, "He never left his bed though, and that smell of sickness clung to him day and night, a hot, moist, sickly, sweet odor." Now that is when Dany mentions one of her most iconic lines in the book for the very first time. And I quote, "That was when they lived in Braavos, in the big house with the red door. Dany had her own room there with a lemon tree outside her window." Dany then informs us that in the death of Sir Willem, the servants who had worked for them in the house with the red door stole all of their money and forced both Dany and Viserys out of the house and onto the streets of Braavos. Dany says that she, and I quote, "had cried when the red door closed behind them forever." That's when Dany and Viserys began to travel across the 9 free cities. And I quote, "From Braavos to Myr, from Myr to Tyrosh, and on to Qohar, and Volantis and Lys, never staying long in any one place." The reason they never stayed long in one place was due to the fact that Viserys was paranoid because he claimed that the usurper Robert Baratheon had hired assassins who could be anywhere at any time. Dany claims at first they were welcome guests in the homes of rich and powerful lords across the 9 free cities, but eventually were shunned due to Robert Baratheon's influence, never forgetting about the hate in his heart reserved specifically for House Targaryen. Life had only grown harder for Dany and Viserys from that day forward. Eventually, they were forced to sell their mother's crown, which was the last thing that they had to remember her. Even the money they received for that had run out, which is actually what led them to Pentos and onto the doorstep of Magister Illyrio Mopatis. Dany, however, claims that the people of Pentos had a nickname for her brother Viserys, and I quote, "They called her brother the Beggar King." Dany did not want to know what they called her. Viserys would often tell her, "We will have it all back someday, sweet sister." Dany, however, couldn't care less, as she has never known Westeros as her home, which is why I earlier called it the home she has never known. And I quote, "All that Daenerys wanted back was the big house with the red door, the lemon tree outside her window, the childhood she had never known." Now, I love this line personally, and it really resonates and hits home with me because for myself, growing up, my family, we moved pretty frequently, pretty much every year whenever our lease was up. And when I was a kid, it just seemed every house or apartment we moved into just continuously got worse and worse, basically downgrading our living space with every move. However, there's one home that I think of as my childhood home, and I get extremely nostalgic thinking about it. Sometimes I even drive over to the old neighborhood I grew up in until I get to that house, and I just start to reminisce on how much easier life used to be when we lived there. And sometimes I even think about all the different families that have since moved into that house since I last did, and it just starts to make me sad. But suddenly, there's a knock on the door to Dany's room. Daenerys invites them in and finally turns away from the window as she's been lost in thought this entire time.